She sat in the courtroom with a smile that sent shivers down everyone's spines. While other women broke into tears upon hearing the charges, Rebecca Lawson held her head high, her gaze cold as if every accusation was meaningless. She truly believed she would walk free, that alcohol, the pain of divorce, and the pity of others would shield her from consequences. What she didn't know was that the tire marks, security camera footage, and threatening text messages sent before the crime had already sealed her fate. That evidence was enough to convince the jury that sometimes a monster doesn't lurk in the shadows, it wears the face of a woman who once knew how to love. How could a mother turn her pain into a rage that killed the father of her own children? And how could she smile while hearing that moment recounted in the courtroom? These are the questions haunting the entire city of Springfield. A question rooted in an act so brutal it defied all logic and human empathy. This crime was not the product of a drunken haze or a moment of weakness. It was the cold, calculated act of someone who believed the law couldn't touch her. The victim, a kind and respected father, beloved by the neighborhood, was chosen for no reason other than being a reminder of the life she had lost. A target destroyed solely to satisfy her thirst for power, revenge, and the arrogant belief that she could decide who deserved to live. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the evening of August 14, 2010, darkness fell over the quiet suburban streets of Springfield, Missouri, carrying the lingering heat of a Midwest summer. Dry leaves rustled across neatly trimmed lawns under the pale glow of streetlights. Each house was a small fortress of warmth and order, where late dinners, familiar TV sounds, and daily routines closed out a peaceful day. In a modest single-story home on Brookhaven Drive, Michael Turner, 39, was preparing for a weekend evening with his two young children. The smell of dinner still lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of freshly cut grass from the backyard. He was a man of quiet strength, an electrical engineer who had spent nearly 2 decades working at the local plant, respected by neighbors for his kindness and humility. Michael's life was a testament to stability and dedication. Leaving home on time each morning, returning each afternoon with a gentle smile as his 2 children ran to hug him. He rarely raised his voice, was always ready to help others, and was known in the neighborhood for his carefully tended garden. That night, Springfield was wrapped in its characteristic calm. Only the distant hum of highway traffic and the breeze through the trees created a soft suburban symphony. That peace, seemingly eternal, was merely a fragile veneer, hiding a darkness about to tear apart the sense of safety this community held dear. Michael Turner had no idea his life was teetering on the edge between the familiar and tragedy. Around 9 p.m., as he tidied up items in the yard, a blinding flash of light cut through the street, followed by the screeching roar of an engine tearing through the night. A silver SUV barreled through the wooden fence of the Turner home at an uncontrollable speed, shattering the silence. The impact echoed through the neighborhood, accompanied by the sound of breaking glass and crumpling metal. This was no ordinary car accident, nor an impulsive outburst of anger. It was an invasion of pure malice, an act so senseless and cruel that investigators later struggled to find a reason that didn't exist. The first official record of the incident was logged at 9:07 p.m., a brief, frantic 911 call reporting an intentional hit-and-run at the Brookhaven residential area. The dispatcher heard only fragmented words amid children's cries and the chaotic sound of metal before the line went dead. A heavy silence hung over the call center for a few seconds before 2 patrol cars were dispatched to the scene immediately. When the first Springfield Police Department patrol cars turned onto Brookhaven Drive, the dashboard clocks read 9:14 p.m. Flashing red and blue lights cast shadows on brick walls and silent trees, reflecting off the road littered with oil streaks and broken glass. The acrid smell of burnt rubber and spilled gasoline filled the air. The silver SUV sat precariously on the Turner lawn, its front end crumpled, the bumper crushed, and steam still rising from the radiator. At the edge of the yard, Michael Turner lay motionless, his body thrown nearly 2 meters from the point of impact. A paramedic knelt to check him, then shook their heads slightly, their face tense but unable to hide sorrow. The death was confirmed on the scene. Michael was gone before the ambulance could arrive. His 2 children, a 9-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl, were led to an ambulance in a state of panic, tears streaming down their faces as they called for their father. A young officer, clearly inexperienced with such scenes, tried to comfort them but couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. He knelt outside the ambulance, gripping the boy's hand tightly, saying something too soft to hear, just to stop the child's sobs, though he himself turned away when he glanced back at the father's body on the grass. Neighbors began spilling outside, many still in pajamas, faces drained of color. A man from across the street pointed at the vehicle, insisting he heard no braking sounds before the crash. A woman beside him, still clutching her phone, repeated the same phrase, "The car didn't break at all." An officer jotted down notes quickly, eyes still scanning the chaotic scene, where every sign pointed to this being no ordinary accident. Yellow caution tape was strung around the Turner yard. Camera flashes blinked relentlessly as investigators photographed and marked the tire tracks stretching from the street to the shattered fence. The crowd outside grew, phone lights flickering in the dark. No one spoke loudly, the horror reduced voices to whispers, as if afraid to disturb the tranquility that had enveloped this neighborhood for years. At the Springfield News Leader's downtown office, night editors received the first police report, "Man killed on the spot in suspected intentional hit-and-run on Brookhaven." A breaking news post went live on their website at 9:45 p.m., and within minutes, it spread across local social media. Comments flooded in. People questioned whether it was an accident, why someone would do this in a peaceful residential area. As police secured the scene, Michael's body was moved to an ambulance, covered with a white sheet. The streetlight illuminated the sheet, making it glow starkly against the night, an image many witnesses said they'd never forget. The 2 children were taken to Mercy Springfield Hospital for medical checks and psychological support. Meanwhile, the area's police chief, overseeing the case, informed dispatch that the victim's family had been contacted. Across town, Linda Turner, Michael's mother, received a call at 10:12 p.m. Upon hearing the words, "serious accident," she dropped the phone. The Turner family arrived at the hospital within an hour. They were led to a small room near the ER, where an officer and a social worker delivered the official news: Michael Turner had died at the scene. Cries erupted instantly, echoing in the cramped space. A relative had to support Linda as she nearly collapsed, while Michael's sister kept asking, "Why my brother?" No one had an answer. That night, Springfield barely slept. Lights in the Brookhaven neighborhood stayed on until dawn, as a tow truck removed the silver SUV from the scene. Morning news broadcasts led with the same image: a shattered wooden fence, a scorched lawn, and a ticker reading, "Mysterious fatal hit and run in Springfield." The community's reaction spread rapidly. Tributes to Michael Turner flooded social media, with many calling him the kindest neighbor in the area. A makeshift memorial appeared in front of his home, fresh flowers, candles, and notes of condolence. Among the children's scribbled messages was a simple haunting line: "Uncle Mike always helped me fix my bike." At local coffee shops, schools, and churches, the only topic was, who did this and why? The shock of loss quickly turned to simmering anger. A neighborhood once proud of its safety and unity had become the scene of an inexplicable crime. And in the minds of Springfield's residents that night, 2 conflicting emotions coexisted: grief for a man lost, and a vague fear that the line between peace and violence was far thinner than they'd ever imagined. The following morning, as the sun rose over the low rooftops of Brookhaven, the Springfield Police Department's crime scene team was on site collecting evidence. The neighborhood remained cordoned off, yellow tape blocking the entrance, and on the dew-soaked lawn, the traces of the previous night's tragedy stood out like an open wound. 2 investigators knelt by the broken wooden fence, where splinters and glass shards mingled with dark tire marks. They marked each trace with small plastic stakes, took photos, and collected soil samples for analysis. An empty glass vodka bottle, a common brand, was found by the driver's seat, still reeking of alcohol. In the glove compartment, Police recovered a cracked black cell phone, damaged in the crash. Technicians sealed the evidence, while another investigator scoured the area for security cameras that might have captured the SUV's path before the incident. A neighbor's front door camera across the street had caught the final moments, headlights sweeping the road, the vehicle charging straight ahead without braking, followed by the deafening crash, smoke, and panicked screams. When the footage was extracted, the team found the license plate clearly visible. Vehicle registration data revealed the silver SUV belonged to Rebecca Lawson, 35, a Springfield resident, and Michael Turner's ex-wife. The discovery silenced the team for a moment. Initial records showed Rebecca and Michael had divorced over a year earlier, sharing 2 children, the same children who witnessed the incident. Civil records indicated Michael had been granted custody after a contentious dispute. One investigator, Lieutenant Patrick Collins, leading the scene team, immediately contacted the tech unit to examine Michael's phone for related evidence. Michael's phone, found near the kitchen door, was intact. Its message log revealed multiple missed calls and texts from a number saved as Rebecca L. sent between 8:30 and 8:55 p.m., just 10 minutes before the crash. The final message, sent at 8:55, read simply, "You'll regret humiliating me." Those few words became the first piece, revealing the true nature of the incident. The tech unit then analyzed GPS data from Rebecca Lawson's phone, showing her vehicle circling Brookhaven multiple times that evening, stopping briefly before the crash. Neighbors confirmed seeing a silver SUV driving slowly around the area about half an hour before the tragedy. A woman at the street corner recalled seeing a woman with her hair tied back, seemingly on her phone, her face visible under the streetlight. Police recorded the witness's statement, cross-referenced it with vehicle registration, and had no doubt. Rebecca Lawson owned and was driving the vehicle at the time of the crime. In an internal report sent that morning, Lieutenant Collins concluded that the scene evidence pointed to intentional action. No brake marks were found on the road, no signs the driver tried to avoid the collision. The vehicle's path, a straight line through the fence directly at the victim, ruled out loss of control. Mechanical analysis showed the accelerator was pressed hard in the final second before impact. As technicians gathered more data, investigators were dispatched to Rebecca Lawson's apartment, 7 miles from the scene. The apartment was locked, curtains drawn, and her car was absent from the lot. Neighbors said they saw Rebecca leave around 7 p.m. the previous evening, appearing agitated. Another recalled her complaining about losing her kids and being humiliated by her ex-husband. These accounts reinforced the theory of personal vengeance. As clues solidified, tension grew at the police station. A compiled report was sent to the Greene County Prosecutor's Office before noon, requesting a statewide arrest warrant for Rebecca Lawson on charges of assault with a deadly weapon resulting in death. The Springfield police chief, in a brief press conference, stated the investigation was moving swiftly and all resources are being deployed to locate the suspect. A photo of Rebecca Lawson pulled from her driver's license was released to local media. In it, she was a blonde woman with a pleasant face but cold, bright eyes. The image appeared on afternoon news with the caption, "Police seek woman suspected in fatal Springfield hit and run." At Brookhaven, yellow tape still surrounded the scene. Residents gathered on the sidewalk, talking endlessly. Their shock turned to fear and anger as they learned the suspect was the victim's ex-wife. Many couldn't believe it. To them, Michael Turner and his family had been a model of kindness and stability. But the evidence told a different story, that the tragedy came not from outside, but from the most familiar place. By late afternoon, the preliminary investigation was complete, closing the first 24 hours since the murder. Investigators had enough to confirm this was no accident, but an intentional killing disguised as a drunken outburst. The arrest warrant for Rebecca Lawson was issued at 5:20 p.m., marking a turning point in a case that gripped Springfield with one heavy question. Why would a woman who was once a wife and mother become the bringer of death to the man she once shared a home with? Around 3 a.m. on August 15, 2010, Nearly 6 hours after the hit and run on Brookhaven Drive, a Missouri State Highway Patrol unit spotted a silver SUV parked near the water's edge at the northern shore of Lake Ozark, about 30 miles from Springfield. The sky was still dark. Thick fog, blanketing the lake with a thin, shimmering mist under the patrol car's headlights. The SUV bore the same license plate as the vehicle involved in the crime. Its headlights were dimly lit, the engine off, but the doors unlocked. As the two officers approached, they found a woman slumped in the driver's seat, her head resting against the window, a half-empty bottle of liquor beside her. The woman was identified as Rebecca Lawson. She reeked of alcohol, her clothes disheveled, her face pale, but her bleary eyes were still open. When the officers asked her to step out, Rebecca shook her head and mumbled that she just wanted to sit for a while. The smell of alcohol was so strong that the officers donned gloves and opened the doors for ventilation. After a few minutes of persuasion, as they attempted to guide her out, Rebecca resisted lightly, pushing an officer's hand away and saying in a hoarse voice, "I didn't do anything wrong, I just want to rest." A quick field test showed her blood alcohol level far exceeded the legal limit. Rebecca was handcuffed and taken to the Springfield police station, gradually sobering up but remaining uncooperative. During the drive, she stayed silent most of the time, occasionally asking, "Can I see my kids?" before leaning her head against the car window. At the station, standard procedures were followed. Rebecca was brought to an interrogation room at 5:40 a.m. She requested water and a cup of coffee, then sat quietly, staring at the two-way mirror. Her face showed no clear signs of fear or remorse, only fatigue and irritation, as if her arrest was an inconvenience, rather than the consequence of a crime. Two investigators, Lieutenant Patrick Collins and Agent Denise Harper, who led the interrogation, began the session. Harper started by asking about Rebecca's whereabouts the previous night. She responded slowly, saying she went driving to clear her head and couldn't remember exactly where she'd been. When asked if she knew about the accident on Brookhaven Drive, Rebecca paused for a long moment before replying, "I heard about it on the radio. It sounds awful." Her response prompted a glance between the investigators. Harper opened a file, placing photos of the scene on the table: the crumpled SUV, the shattered fence, and Michael Turner's body on the lawn. Rebecca glanced at them, neither flinching nor showing emotion. After a few seconds, she said softly, "I didn't mean to. I thought he'd move in time." Collins pressed, "Are you admitting you drove into Mr. Turner's house?" Rebecca clenched her hands, staying silent. When reminded that her statements were being recorded, she looked directly at the two-way mirror and said, "I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer." The interrogation paused for her to sign a waiver of silence. For the rest of the session, Rebecca remained passive, giving short answers and occasionally closing her eyes, pretending to sleep. The investigators noted signs of fatigue and reduced alertness, but no panic or loss of emotional control. Instead, she seemed to be trying to maintain the upper hand. While awaiting her lawyer, the tech unit completed a blood analysis. The official report arrived at 7:15 a.m. Rebecca Lawson's blood alcohol concentration was 0.19%, more than twice the legal limit. This confirmed she had been driving heavily intoxicated. No other substances were detected. When presented with the results, Rebecca shrugged and said quietly, "I know I was drinking, but I didn't think it was that bad." She refused to sign an acknowledgement of her intoxication. Police filed for temporary detention, with initial charges of assault with a deadly weapon resulting in death and driving under the influence with severe consequences. A quick search of her vehicle at the impound lot revealed details matching the crime scene: broken glass, mud, and paint chips from the Turner home's wooden fence embedded in the SUV's front end. A technical report confirmed the match. Officers noted that, throughout the process, Rebecca appeared indifferent, asking no questions about the victim and showing no remorse or concern. She only asked when she could call her mother to tell her it's not as serious as they think. When informed the victim had died at the scene, Rebecca froze for a few seconds before saying, "I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't mean to kill him." Her statement was recorded verbatim in the interrogation log. By 9 a.m., police physician completed a health check, confirming Rebecca had no serious injuries. She was moved to a holding cell pending preliminary prosecution procedures. Outside, media swarmed the Springfield police station as news of the suspect's arrest spread. Local reporters described the morning as a bitter awakening for the community. The case was no longer a mystery, but a tragedy born from a broken family. In the evidence room, Lieutenant Collins finalized the investigation report. All evidence, scene traces, phone data, blood test results, confirmed Rebecca Lawson as the driver in the hit-and-run that killed Michael Turner. The report ended with a brief, chilling note. The suspect shows no signs of remorse. Recommend forwarding the case to the prosecutor for consideration of high-level criminal charges. By late morning, as officers completed paperwork, Rebecca sat in the holding cell, her vacant gaze fixed on the white wall. The only sounds in the hallway were the scratch of pens and the clang of the iron door closing, marking the official detention of a suspect in the case that shook Springfield. 3 days after Rebecca Lawson's detention, the case file was sent to the Greene County Prosecutor's Office for formal prosecution review. Assistant District Attorney Laura Bennett, a seasoned prosecutor known for her meticulous approach and calm demeanor, took charge. She received hundreds of pages of reports, recordings, and scene photos, immediately convening a meeting with the Springfield Police Department's investigators to review all details before filing charges. The meeting took place in a small second-floor room at the county office, the white light of a projector reflecting on tired faces after nearly a week of relentless work. A case timeline was displayed on a board, key times, locations, vehicle trajectory, and critical milestones laid out in sequence. From there, the team reconstructed the events of August 14th. At 8:30 p.m., Rebecca left her East Monroe apartment, driving to a bar near downtown. She left the bar, described by a server as having had a lot to drink. At 8:55 p.m., a threatening text was sent to Michael Turner's phone. At 9:02 p.m., the silver SUV appeared on a Brookhaven Drive security camera, crashing into the victim's yard. At 9:07 p.m., the 911 call was logged. This clear timeline proved Rebecca's actions were not impulsive, but involved premeditation, at least in intent. After finalizing the timeline, the prosecution gathered additional witness statements. A neighbor, Susan Reed, confirmed seeing the silver SUV circling the neighborhood at least twice before the incident. Another, Harold Glover, recalled seeing a blonde woman wearing glasses, resembling Rebecca Lawson, driving the vehicle. These accounts, combined with GPS data from her phone, supported the argument that the suspect had surveilled the target area before acting. Next, forensic experts were brought in. A mechanical analysis team reconstructed the collision trajectory, confirming the vehicle traveled at an average speed of 47 miles per hour, far exceeding the residential limit. Their report noted no brake marks or swerving to avoid impact. A forensic psychologist for the prosecution concluded the act showed controlled escalation, meaning the driver was aware of the consequences but chose to proceed. ADA Bennett compiled the data, building a case on 3 pillars: motive, action, and consequence. For motive, she argued the prolonged divorce and custody dispute fueled deep resentment. Evidence showed Rebecca harbored long-term bitterness, feeling humiliated by losing custody of her 2 children. For action, sending a threatening text, drinking, driving to the victim's neighborhood, and accelerating directly at the target demonstrated clear intent. For consequence, the victim's death at the scene, witnessed by his 2 children, made the crime particularly severe in its emotional and social impact. In a memo to her superiors, Bennett wrote, "The defendant's actions were not an accident. They were an expression of hatred and wounded pride, pushed to the extreme by alcohol and a desire for revenge." The prosecution team spent 3 days finalizing the preliminary indictment, recommending that the Greene County Court charge Rebecca Lawson with aggravated felony manslaughter, a form of manslaughter with intent and aggravating factors. Before filing, Bennett reviewed Rebecca's personal records, 2 prior DUI fines, a temporary restraining order from a 2009 emotional abuse case, and court-mandated counseling during the divorce. These bolstered the argument that her behavior was not a momentary lapse, but a pattern of violations culminating in a deadly outcome. On the afternoon of August 19th, the court approved the criminal prosecution. A public statement was issued. Defendant Rebecca Lawson is charged with aggravated felony manslaughter in the death of Michael Turner. The news spread rapidly across Springfield. Local and state media ran headlines like, "Ex-wife charged in fatal hit-and-run," or "From love to tragedy, Springfield reels." Public opinion split. Some expressed sympathy, arguing Rebecca was a woman who lost control, deeply hurt by the divorce, a victim of her own emotions. They cited her past as a devoted, gentle mother with no prior violent behavior. But most reacted with outrage, insisting no circumstance justified taking a life, especially with 2 children witnessing their father's death. Heated debates erupted on local forums. Outside the courthouse, residents lit candles for Michael Turner, holding signs reading, "Justice for Michael." Some online articles analyzed the defendant's psychology, describing it as the collapse of an outwardly normal woman. ADA Bennett remained cautious amid the public outcry. She declined interviews, issuing only a brief statement. "The prosecutor's office will do everything within the law to ensure justice is served." In her office, she meticulously reviewed the case, marking potential defense vulnerabilities, preparing for a trial she knew would be far from simple. As the day's last sunlight filtered through her window, Springfield remained unsettled by the shock of a crime unthinkable in its quiet neighborhoods. The case was not just a story of a broken family, but a mirror reflecting humanity's dark side, where love, pain, and pride could blend into violence. With the prosecution file complete, a new phase began as justice took on its weighty course. On the morning of April 4, 2011, nearly 8 months after the night that shook Springfield, Rebecca Lawson's trial opened at the Greene County Courthouse in Missouri. The atmosphere outside was thick with tension. From early morning, dozens of reporters and residents gathered on the courthouse's gray stone steps, a building that had seen many major state cases, but rarely one that gripped the public so intensely. News vans lined Boonville Avenue, antennas pointed at the overcast sky, cameras trained on the main entrance. Inside, security was tight, with judicial officers stationed at every exit. Everyone knew this case was not just a legal proceeding, but a test of the community's faith in justice. Rebecca Lawson was led into courtroom 3. She wore a pale gray suit, her hair neatly tied back, her face lightly but carefully made up. From her gait to her gaze, Rebecca exuded an unsettling calm, almost overconfident for someone facing a murder charge. She didn't shy away from the cameras, even offering a faint smile as lenses turned toward her. Some reporters noted, Defendant Lawson maintained an arrogant demeanor, showing no remorse. In the front row, Michael Turner's family sat in silence. His mother, Linda, wore a simple black outfit, clutching a white handkerchief. Beside her was Michael's sister, her eyes red from crying, while his 2 young children, brought by relatives, sat separately in the back row. Their presence hushed the courtroom. Before the trial began, murmurs from reporters and spectators filled the air, then fell silent as Judge Robert Ellis entered. The room stood, the only sound the soft echo of shoes on the wooden floor. The judge delivered opening remarks, reminding the jury of their responsibility and urging absolute impartiality. After procedural formalities, Assistant District Attorney Laura Bennett stepped to the podium. Her voice was clear, each word deliberately emphasized. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, we are here today, not because of an accident, but because of an act driven by hatred, carried out with awareness and choice. The victim, Mr. Michael Turner, was robbed of his life by the very woman who was once his wife." As the prosecutor spoke, Rebecca sat upright, staring straight ahead, lips slightly pursed, showing no emotion. When Bennett displayed the first crime scene images, the shattered wooden fence, the crumpled SUV, and the ambulance lights piercing the night, many in the courtroom bowed their heads. But Rebecca's cold gaze remained unchanged. ADA Bennett read the formal indictment. Defendant Rebecca Lawson is charged with aggravated felony manslaughter, with aggravating factors of intentional homicide by vehicle while intoxicated. The evidence will show the defendant had time to think, chose her actions, and accepted their consequences. Her voice, though not loud, cut through the air like a blade, leaving the room breathless. In the jury box, some jurors took notes, while others silently watched the defendant. When Bennett paused, defense attorney Thomas Graham stood, stating briefly, "My client denies all allegations of intent. We will prove this was a tragic accident, nothing more." His words were firm, but quickly met with Bennett's icy stare. The judge acknowledged both sides' opening statements, reminding them that all arguments must rely on evidence presented during the trial. Before moving to evidence, the court allowed a brief moment for the prosecution to introduce the victim's background. A short video played on a large screen, footage of Michael Turner with his 2 children at a spring picnic the previous year. Laughter from the recording echoed, causing many spectators to lower their faces. Michael's mother broke into tears, needing to be briefly escorted out by a relative. Throughout, Rebecca sat still, her eyes fixed on the screen, her expression unchanged. A reporter noted in their coverage that she looked as if watching a stranger's movie. When the video ended, ADA Bennett thanked the court, concluding her opening with a single line, "We will show you that calm smile is not that of an innocent woman, but of one who believed she was above the law." The courtroom fell so silent that the ticking of the wall clock was audible. In the back row, a man shook his head, while outside the courthouse doors, the crowd waited, clutching morning papers with bold headlines. Rebecca Lawson faces trial, Springfield's shocking case begins. As the opening session ended, Judge Ellis called a 15-minute recess before the first witness examination. As judicial staff guided people out, Rebecca briefly turned to glance back. For a moment, her eyes met those of Michael's mother, leaning against a wall. No one knew what passed between them in that instant. But the air in the courtroom grew heavy, as if grief and defiance coexisted in an indescribable silence. As the trial entered its second day, the atmosphere in the Greene County courtroom grew heavier than ever. After the opening statements, Assistant District Attorney Laura Bennett began presenting evidence. The critical phase to prove that Rebecca Lawson's actions were not merely an accident, but a deliberate choice leading to Michael Turner's death. The room's lights dimmed, and a large screen in front of the jury lit up, displaying the first crime scene images. Each photo was shown slowly. The crumpled silver SUV, its windshield cracked, the wooden fence shattered into pieces, and the lawn scarred with dark tire marks stretching from the road to where the victim fell. Each image was clearly annotated with time and location, illustrating the vehicle's path in those fateful seconds. A police forensic technician, who directly collected data at the scene, was called as the first witness. He explained to the court that the nearly 20-meter-long rubber marks showed no signs of sudden braking. If the driver had tried to stop, we'd at least see skid marks or tire lockup, but there's nothing here. The vehicle accelerated steadily and struck directly, he said. Jurors looked at the screen, many frowning as a zoomed-in image showed the impact point hitting the fence's center, precisely where the victim stood, according to the children's testimony. Following the scene analysis, the prosecution moved to a video extracted from a neighbor's security camera across the street. The nighttime footage was grainy but clear enough to show the silver SUV's entire movement. It appeared at the end of the street, headlights blazing, accelerating continuously with no sign of slowing or swerving. At the moment of impact, a flash of light flared and the screen shook violently. A sharp crash echoed in the courtroom as the video paused on its final frame. Smoke and ambulance lights in the distance. Some spectators covered their mouths. The jury was given copies of the video to review in detail. Next, a police image analysis expert confirmed the vehicle's average speed at impact was 47 miles per hour, while the residential speed limit was only 25. He concluded, "This cannot be called an accident. This was a controlled collision trajectory." As the room's lights brightened, ADA Bennett presented the next piece of evidence. The threatening text message sent from the defendant's phone to the victim before the incident. A printed copy was given to each juror, its brief content just a few lines. "You'll regret humiliating me." The message was sent at 8:55 p.m., 7 minutes before the camera captured the crash. The prosecution considered this the nail in the coffin of the case. A Springfield Police digital forensics investigator confirmed the message came directly from Rebecca Lawson's phone, with no signs of tampering or unauthorized access. Additionally, the phone log showed 4 missed calls from Rebecca to Michael minutes before the text, indicating she tried contacting him before deciding to drive to his home. As the evidence was read, Rebecca sat still, hands clasped on her lap, eyes fixed on the table. No emotion crossed her face. Prosecutor Bennett then presented the defendant's blood test results. A forensic toxicologist from the Missouri State Laboratory took the stand, reading the official findings. Rebecca Lawson's blood alcohol concentration was 0.19%, over twice the legal limit. Accompanying reports showed no use of drugs or other hallucinogens, ruling out loss of control due to chemical reaction. The toxicologist concluded the defendant was fully conscious, just in a state of impaired judgment, but still alert enough to drive with direction and accelerate intentionally. This statement cast a pall over the courtroom. In the jury box, some exchanged glances, scribbling quickly in their notebooks. When asked further about alcohol's impact on driving behavior, the toxicologist replied, "Alcohol doesn't make someone commit a crime. It only removes the last moral barriers." Another investigator, Lieutenant Patrick Collins, the scene's lead, took the stand last that day. He summarized the investigation, confirming all physical evidence, from paint and mud on the vehicle to tire marks, matched the scene. In his testimony, he recounted finding Rebecca at Lake Ozark, noting she wasn't panicked, only saying, "I didn't think it was that bad." Collins emphasized this, suggesting it wasn't the words of remorse, but of someone surprised they couldn't control the outcome of their actions. As he finished, Prosecutor Bennett turned to the jury, summarizing briefly, "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've seen is not random chance. It's a chain of actions starting with a vengeful thought and ending with an innocent man's death." No one in the room spoke. Bennett requested that all evidence, video, photos, test results, and scene analysis be entered into the court's official record. Judge Ellis approved, instructing the clerk to document everything. As the clock neared noon, the prosecution's evidence presentation concluded. The jury was given a 30-minute break before returning for internal discussion. As they left, many carried thick files, their faces heavy. Some reporters noted, the prosecution's evidence leaves little room for justification. In the back row, Michael Turner's mother remained seated, hands trembling slightly, but eyes fixed on the wooden table where Rebecca Lawson sat. The defendant maintained her usual calm, silent demeanor, as if the proceedings were unrelated to her. The scene etched itself into the minds of spectators, a woman seated in a court of justice, facing evidence of her crime, yet unmoved. When the judge called a recess, the sound of shifting chairs mixed with pen scratching, but no one spoke loudly. The air was so heavy, it felt like a physical weight enveloping the room. That afternoon, after the prosecution finished presenting evidence, defense attorney Thomas Graham rose to begin the defense. A seasoned criminal lawyer with experience representing clients with mental health issues or impulsive behaviors, Graham stood tall, his voice calm. He adjusted a thick file in his hands and opened with a measured tone, aiming to distance the trial from public outrage. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, members of the jury," he began. "We do not deny that a life was lost, but the court's task today is not to punish based on emotion, but to determine whether my client's actions were carried out with intent to kill." He paused, glancing at the jury, then continued. "We will show that Rebecca Lawson was a deeply wounded woman, a mother lost after a divorce, who spiraled into distress and was overtaken by alcohol, not a malicious killer. Graham presented a file of medical reports from a private psychiatric clinic showing Rebecca underwent therapy in 2009 after the court awarded custody to Michael Turner. Her therapist's report noted signs of anxiety, depression, and impulsive behavior during periods of emotional stress. This record, Graham said, shows Rebecca was not capable of rational response under intense emotional triggers. She did not plan a murder. She acted in a moment of loss of control. Pointing to the prosecution's morning timeline on the board, he continued, "The prosecution claims leaving the bar and driving to Brookhaven Drive was a deliberate sequence. But ladies and gentlemen, it could also be the unconscious actions of someone out of control, someone in a psychological crisis, intoxicated, driven by vague anger rather than murderous intent." Graham requested to show a recorded psychological interview from September 2010 in jail. In the video, Rebecca, sounding exhausted, told a police psychologist, "I just remember drinking a lot. I don't recall where I drove. I just wanted him to listen to me." Graham let the video play out, then turned off the screen. Speaking almost in a monologue, he said, "This is the voice of a panicked person, someone who lost control, not a calculated murderer." He also noted her 0.19% blood alcohol level severely impaired her judgment, citing medical research showing such levels can lead to impulsive actions and limited environmental awareness. "We're not saying she's innocent," Graham stressed, "but we must distinguish between intentional murder and manslaughter due to psychological loss of control. All evidence shows my client acted in a disordered state, not with calculation or intent to end a life." He cited character witnesses, former colleagues, her children's teachers, and college friends, who described Rebecca as reserved, soft-spoken, with no history of violence. "Such a woman," he said, "would not suddenly become a killer overnight." Michael Turner's death was the tragic result of uncontrolled emotions, not a plot. As Graham spoke, Rebecca sat still, hands clasped on her lap, occasionally nodding faintly when her past was mentioned. The jury listened, some taking notes, others watching silently. At the prosecution table, ADA Bennett scribbled continuously, occasionally looking up with a cold, focused gaze. Graham shifted to legal strategy, requesting the court consider reducing the charge from aggravated felony manslaughter to involuntary manslaughter, manslaughter due to unintentional actions under the influence of alcohol and mental distress. He argued that the highest charge overlooked the law's humanitarian aspect, which allows consideration of the defendant's mental state at the time of the crime. Justice, he concluded, is not vengeance. It must include compassion. Judge Ellis noted the request and declared the defense's presentation concluded. Murmurs rose briefly in the courtroom, then faded. Though Graham tried to portray Rebecca as a wounded woman, her calm demeanor during the defense left many spectators unsympathetic. As he returned to his seat, Rebecca leaned slightly to whisper something to him, her expression still composed and unreadable. The room fell silent as the judge announced a recess, giving the jury time to review both sides' arguments before continuing the next morning. The next morning, courtroom 3 was packed again. The tension intensified as witness testimonies began. ADA Laura Bennett rose, requesting the court summon the first witness, Susan Reed, a neighbor living across from the victim's home. A middle-aged woman with graying hair stepped to the stand, holding a small notebook. Her voice trembled as she began. "I've lived on Brookhaven Drive for over 10 years. I knew Michael Turner as a kind man, always greeting everyone. I only met Rebecca a few times, usually when she picked up the kids." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "About 2 weeks before the incident, I saw her driving the silver SUV around the neighborhood several times, sometimes stopping in front of Michael's house. She stayed in the car for a while, just looking inside, then drove off." Bennett asked, "Can you confirm it was the defendant's vehicle?" "Yes," Reed nodded. "Same color, same license plate, and I saw her clearly through the window." Her testimony stirred murmurs in the courtroom. Some jurors exchanged glances. Bennett thanked Reed and called Harold Glover, a witness to the crash. Glover, a man in his 60s living at the street's corner, appeared calm but weary-eyed. He recounted, I was watching TV when I heard an engine roaring. Looking out the window, I saw the SUV speeding like crazy. I remember clearly, it didn't brake or swerve, just went straight. I saw her looking forward, hands tight on the wheel. He paused, eyes welling up. I shouted, but it was too late. The crash was so loud, I knew someone was dead. Bennett gave him a moment before asking, "Did you recognize the driver?" Glover nodded, saying softly, "It was Rebecca Lawson. I knew her from seeing her pick up the kids a few times." The jury took notes, the room heavy with tension. At the defense table, Rebecca sat unmoved, showing no reaction. After the two witnesses stepped down, the prosecution called Dr. Andrew Collins, a state forensic pathologist, to present autopsy findings. Collins opened his briefcase, his voice steady and clinical. Victim Michael Turner died from severe chest and head trauma. The direct impact at approximately 45 miles per hour caused multiple rib fractures, internal organ damage, and an immediate neck fracture. Based on the body's position and vehicle marks, the victim had no chance of survival. He displayed blurred medical images to the jury, still graphic enough to unsettle. "These are not injuries from a minor accident," he said, "but the result of an immense deliberate impact." Collins confirmed no brake or swerve marks, consistent with the scene report. "This indicates the driver made no attempt to slow down. The collision was sustained from start to finish," he concluded. As he left the stand, the jury sat silently, many avoiding the screen. Bennett returned to the prosecution table, pulling out a file of physical evidence. A forensic technician was called to discuss material comparisons between the defendant's vehicle and the scene. He explained that paint and wood samples from Turner's fence matched scratches on the SUV's front bumper. Mud and leaves on the vehicle's hood, analyzed for plant DNA, matched a maple tree in the victim's yard. "Everything aligns," he said. "There's no doubt the vehicle involved was the defendant's." Bennett requested a magnified image of the SUV's front. A dried reddish-brown streak on the bumper was identified as human blood, matching Michael Turner's blood type. A faint murmur rose in the courtroom, but was quickly silenced by the judge's call for order. Bennett stepped to the room's center, her voice measured. "What does this evidence show?" "It shows the defendant didn't just lose control, she chose not to stop. She knew exactly what she was doing." She turned to the jury, her gaze steady. "No one is forced to press the gas instead of the brake. No one accidentally sends a threatening text and drives straight to the victim's home. This wasn't intoxication. It was nurtured hatred erupting into action." In the front row, Michael's mother bowed her head, hands clenched. The silence stretched until the judge tapped his gavel, urging calm. At the defense table, Graham stood to object to the prosecution's emotional tone, arguing it was more emotional than legal. The judge noted the objection, but allowed Bennett to proceed, emphasizing her arguments were based on court-approved evidence. To bolster her case, the prosecution called a Missouri State Police data analyst who extracted GPS data from Rebecca's vehicle. He confirmed the navigation system showed the SUV circling Brookhaven Drive for nearly 20 minutes before stopping in front of the victim's home, then accelerating suddenly. A map displayed on the screen showed a clear looping path around the neighborhood. Bennett pointed to the chart, saying, "This proves the defendant wasn't just passing by. She was there with purpose." Combined with neighbor testimony and camera footage, the evidence formed a seamless chain, eliminating any doubt the incident was a mere accident. As the prosecution's presentation ended, the judge allowed the defense to cross-examine. Graham suggested the defendant might not have been aware of her actions due to intoxication, but witnesses and experts firmly stated there were no signs of loss of control. Each of his questions was answered decisively, leaving no room for an unintentional defense. The trial broke for lunch. The jury was led to a private room, many carrying documents and images, their faces pensive. Some reporters outside noted in midday reports that this morning's evidence nearly sealed off any chance of justification. In the now quiet courtroom, Rebecca Lawson remained at the defense table, her gaze fixed on the ceiling as if the proceedings were irrelevant. She showed no fear or remorse, only calmly smoothing her sleeve while the prosecution packed up. At the back, Judge Ellis made brief notes in his file, his voice low. "The jury will resume this afternoon." No one said it aloud, but everyone understood the tide had turned heavily toward the prosecution. The morning's evidence left a clear mark. Every piece, from testimony to images to scientific analysis, told the same story. This was no accident, but a conscious decision. That afternoon, Courtroom 3 fell silent as Judge Ellis announced the next phase of the trial. Testimony from the victim's family. This was no longer about arguments or evidence, but a moment for humanity, where pain, loss, and the consequences of the crime were laid bare before the public. ADA Laura Bennett stood, her voice low and measured. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Mrs. Linda Turner, the victim's mother, to the stand." A woman in her 60s, petite with silver-streaked black hair, walked slowly forward. Her hands trembled slightly, clutching a folded piece of paper, her eyes distant as if emerging from a long dream. When she began speaking, her voice was hoarse with emotion. "Michael was my eldest son. From a young age, he was kind and patient. He never fought with anyone, always taking the short end of the stick." She paused, taking a deep breath to hold back tears. "I remember when he got divorced, he told me everything would be okay, that he just wanted to care for his 2 kids. I never imagined I'd see my son in a coffin because of someone who once called me mom." She looked up, her gaze turning toward the defendant. "I don't want to look at you, Rebecca, but I have to say this. You didn't just take my son, you stole the trust of 2 children in this world." Her voice trembled, but remained steady. The room sank into silence, broken only by the scratching of the court clerk's pen. Some jurors bowed their heads, avoiding direct eye contact with the grieving mother. ADA Bennett gently escorted her from the stand, then turned to the 2 children, Ethan, 9, and Lily, 7, sitting with their guardian in the back row. She explained to the judge that their testimony had been prepared as brief statements with a psychologist's support. The judge nodded, requesting absolute silence. The courtroom held its breath as Ethan stepped forward, his sneakers tapping lightly on the wooden floor, a small sound echoing in the stillness. Dressed in a white shirt, he held a neatly folded paper. His voice was soft and shaky. "I don't remember everything from that night, just a loud noise, and Dad saying, 'Go inside.' But I didn't make it in time. I saw the car hit Dad. Then everything went quiet." Soft sobs rose from the spectators. Ethan paused, eyes welling up, then continued. "Now I dream about Dad every night. He doesn't say anything, just looks at me. Every morning I look at Dad's room, but the door never opens anymore." He folded the paper, glanced at the judge, and stepped down, his small hand tightly held by his guardian. The air grew so thick, no one dared cough or move. Next was Lily. She walked to the stand, her hair tied in pigtails, clutching a brown teddy bear. She didn't read from a paper, but spoke briefly in a child's innocent voice. "I miss Dad. I miss him reading me stories. I don't understand why he had to go. I just want to ask Mom, why did you do it?" Her words, short and unscripted, cut through the courtroom like a blade. The victim's mother sobbed loudly. The jury sat frozen. Rebecca Lawson tilted her head slightly, lips pursed, her face still impassive. A reporter later described the moment as the only time the courtroom truly shattered. After the children were let out, Bennett called a psychologist, treating the victim's family to briefly address the long-term emotional impact. He explained that Ethan showed signs of post-traumatic stress, with frequent nightmares and fear of car sounds. Lily had become withdrawn, rarely speaking, and displayed a loss of security even in familiar settings. He concluded, "It wasn't just one life lost in this incident. 2 children lost their childhood and sense of trust. Such wounds can't be measured by law, only remembered through memory." Tears fell among the spectators. Judge Ellis paused the proceedings for a few minutes to restore order. When the trial resumed, Bennett requested to read a short letter from Michael Turner's sister, who couldn't attend. Her voice rang out slowly. "My brother made people believe kindness still existed. His death didn't just take one person, it took our faith in the peace of our home. She folded the letter and placed it on the prosecution table. The room fell silent. Judge Ellis leaned forward, his voice low and even. "The court thanks the victim's family for their statements. We understand justice cannot fully ease this pain, but it will acknowledge the truth." As he finished, faint sounds of shifting chairs echoed, but no one spoke further. In the jury box, skepticism had faded. Their faces were heavy, eyes fixed on the defendant, who sat upright, hands clasped, her expression unchanged. For a moment, absolute silence enveloped the courtroom, the silence of humanity confronting raw pain, where all excuses and arguments became meaningless. As the clerk tapped the gavel to signal the end of the testimony, no one clapped or stood immediately. Spectators quietly bowed their heads, as if honoring what they had just witnessed. Outside, late afternoon sunlight filtered through the courtroom's windows, casting a thin glow on the judge's wooden bench. A quiet moment, heavy with the weight of justice bowing before the pain of the living. In the trial's final days, Rebecca Lawson's demeanor became the focal point of the courtroom. From morning to afternoon, she maintained an eerie calm, almost defiant. While witnesses wept, and the victim's family bowed in grief, the defendant sat upright, hands clasped, watching each speaker with a cold gaze, occasionally flashing a faint smile. That smile, small, brief, but appearing at inexplicable moments, became a symbol of callousness that shook the courtroom. Reporters noted that each time the prosecution reread the charges, Rebecca Lawson leaned back, smirking as if hearing a trivial tale. Several times, when the prosecution emphasized the threatening text and evidence of intent, she turned to her attorney Graham, shrugging slightly and whispering something only he could hear. Judge Ellis twice admonished her to maintain decorum, but Rebecca seemed unbothered. During one morning session, as Bennett replayed the security footage of the SUV crashing through the fence, Rebecca leaned forward, propped her chin on her hand, eyes narrowing as if watching a film with a known ending. When Bennett requested the video be entered as additional evidence, Rebecca let out a small laugh and shook her head. That brief chuckle, ringing out in the silent room, prompted the judge to pause and tap his gavel. "Defendant Lawson, the court requires you to maintain appropriate behavior." She looked up, replying softly, "I just think things are being said wrong." The simple low statement was enough to stir the spectators. Some Springfield residents in attendance exchanged headshakes. They couldn't believe the woman before them, once described as a model mother, could display such near-mocking indifference to the consequences she caused. Evening news broadcasts repeatedly showed Rebecca smiling as the charges were read, sparking statewide outrage. One major paper ran the headline, "The Smile of an Unrepentant Killer." During breaks, reporters observed Rebecca casually chatting with her attorney, occasionally adjusting her blazer and nodding at cameras. When asked about the trial's progress, she said briefly, "People are misunderstanding me. They're only hearing one side." Her response quickly spread across media, igniting fierce criticism. Social media comments overflowed with anger, many calling her soulless or someone who thinks she's above justice. Inside the courtroom, her demeanor remained unchanged. During the prosecution's cross-examination, when Bennett asked, "Do you regret that 2 children had to witness their father's death?" Rebecca replied, "I regret being misunderstood. I never meant to hurt anyone." Her voice was steady, without tears. The judge had to stop her as spectators began to cry. In the jury box, many took notes but avoided looking up. Later, Bennett used this demeanor to bolster her argument about the defendant's callousness and arrogance. In her final questioning, she faced Rebecca directly. "Throughout this process, you haven't once apologized. You haven't asked about the victim's family or shown remorse. Is that correct?" Rebecca met her gaze, her voice firm. "I have nothing to apologize for if I didn't intend to kill anyone." The response drew gasps from the courtroom, and some of the victim's family left their seats. Bennett turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the strongest evidence, not DNA, not cameras, but the person sitting before you, who took a life, and still thinks she's right. She paused, then said slowly, "An accidental offender would be afraid. A deliberate offender would make excuses, but only someone devoid of human emotion could sit here and smile." The courtroom's atmosphere grew thick. Jurors exchanged glances silently. At the prosecution table, Bennett set down her file, nodding slightly to the judge, signaling her argument was complete. Meanwhile, Rebecca turned to Graham, whispered something, and smiled. That small act, in that context, further cemented the image of an unrepentant defendant in the minds of those present. The court clerk noted at least 3 times in the record that defendant Lawson displayed inappropriate behavior during the trial. The press outside called it unforgivable arrogance. That evening's broadcast began with "Justice doesn't just look at evidence, it looks at character." Today, Springfield saw a smile that chilled the city. At day's end, as Judge Ellis closed the arguments, the courtroom remained silent. Rebecca Lawson stood, adjusted her jacket, her face expressionless. She scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the jury for a second before turning away, as if still believing she'd walk out free. That cold, misguided confidence made everyone present realize that, though the law had yet to rule, she had condemned herself with her unrepentant demeanor. After 10 days of intense litigation, Rebecca Lawson's trial reached its conclusion. On the morning of April 15, 2011, Courtroom 3 at the Greene County Courthouse was packed. The air was thick, so heavy that even footsteps on the wooden floor echoed unnaturally. The 12-person jury, after over 6 hours of closed deliberation, was led back to announce their verdict. The room's lights dimmed slightly, curtains partially drawn, with only a faint beam from the ceiling illuminating the center, where Judge Robert Ellis sat. Rebecca Lawson appeared as polished as ever, in a pale gray blazer, hair neatly tied, her gaze calm. She didn't bow her head or avoid reporters' lenses, instead glancing at the spectators with a fleeting smile. The victim's mother, Linda Turner, sat in the front row with her 2 grandchildren, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the bench. As the clerk read the verdict's preamble, faint murmurs rose and quickly faded. The foreperson was asked, "Have you reached a consensus?" The jury leader stood, voice firm. "Your Honor, we have. Defendant Rebecca Lawson is found guilty of aggravated felony manslaughter." The words landed like a hammer, resonating through the room in seconds of utter silence. At the prosecution table, ADA Laura Bennett only nodded, showing no triumph. At the defense table, Graham bowed his head, sighing. Rebecca Lawson sat still, expressionless, lips pursed, leaning toward her attorney to whisper something. Judge Ellis acknowledged the verdict, delivering the court's remarks. He emphasized that the evidence was clear, the defendant's actions showing deliberate intent and disregard for human life. His voice was low and even. Not harsh but weighted. The defendant drove a vehicle while intoxicated, targeting the victim, her former husband. This act not only took a life, but left irreparable emotional scars on 2 children. He paused, looking at the defense table. "Rebecca Lawson, do you wish to make a final statement before sentencing?" The room held its breath. Rebecca stood, adjusted her jacket, her calm gaze meeting the judge's. "I just want to say I'm not a murderer," she said slowly. "I didn't mean to hurt him. People may think otherwise, but I know the truth." She paused, glanced at the jury, then sat down. No tears, no apology. Judge Ellis was silent for a moment, then spoke firmly. "The court acknowledges the defendant's statement, but the truth is determined by evidence and justice, not personal belief." He lifted the sentencing document, reading clearly. "For the intentional killing by vehicle while intoxicated, deemed aggravated felony manslaughter, the court sentences Rebecca Lawson to 18 years in prison without parole and permanently revokes her custody rights." The sentence is effective immediately. The gavel's sound echoed in the breathless room. Linda Turner sobbed, her choked cries mingling with sighs from the spectators. Some covered their mouths, while reporters scribbled frantically. The prosecution team said nothing, quietly packing their files. Graham placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder as a reflex, but she brushed it off. Her face retained its smugness, lips slightly curled, as if the sentence were a formality she'd soon overcome. That demeanor sparked outrage among many in the room. A woman in the audience blurted out, "She doesn't even know remorse." Judicial officers quickly called for order, but the crowd's emotions had crossed a threshold. The press later described the scene as a silent explosion, where justice was served, but no one felt fully relieved due to the defendant's indifference. As Rebecca was led away for post-sentencing procedures, she held her head high, not looking back. She didn't seek Linda Turner's gaze or glance at her children, clinging to their grandmother. Only the faint clink of handcuffs echoed as she walked between the rows, a sound lingering in the tense space. Judge Ellis left the bench, pausing briefly before entering his chambers. He said softly to the clerk, "A just sentence, but no winners." That remark was later quoted widely as the most fitting summary of the case. In the hallway, as the doors opened, midday sunlight hit Linda Turner's face. She stood still, holding her grandchildren close. A reporter asked, "Do you feel relieved?" She shook her head. "No one can bring my son back, but at least now I can tell him justice was done." Outside, the crowd dispersed, but conversations continued. Some said the sentence was just, a reminder that justice still existed in Springfield. Others just looked at each other, silent. That evening's news showed the prison van leaving the courthouse, passing the lawn where hundreds still stood, their eyes mixing sorrow, anger, and a touch of relief. The ticker read, "Rebecca Lawson sentenced to 18 years without parole. Justice restored for Michael Turner." The story closed quietly, with no applause or cheers, just the stillness of a community that had finally seen justice take the shape of its pain. In the weeks following the trial, Springfield gradually returned to its familiar rhythm, but the echoes of Rebecca Lawson's case lingered in conversations, news reports, and the memories of those who witnessed it. The shock that gripped the city stemmed not only from the crime itself, but from the fact that it was committed by someone who had been a wife, a mother, a familiar face in the community, a person who once embodied normalcy. Local newspapers published a series of articles reflecting on the case's long journey, calling it a tragedy of neglected emotions, where a woman allowed pain and alcohol to lead her to a point of no return. Television specials emphasized that the story was not just a family tragedy, but a warning to thousands grappling with broken marriages, where the line between hurt and hatred is thinner than ever. Springfield, a city known for its peace, now bore an indelible emotional scar. Residents of Brookhaven Drive took months to feel safe again. The wooden fence at the Turner home was rebuilt, the lawn neatly trimmed, but for locals, the image of the SUV careening through that street remained a haunting memory. At the street corner, Michael Turner's memorial endured, with fresh flowers replaced weekly. Many paused to light a small candle, saying nothing. The Springfield community did not forget, but they chose to heal through kindness, through social initiatives, raising awareness about domestic violence and the dangers of alcohol. In 2012, the Turner Foundation for Safer Families was established by Michael's old friends, offering free counseling for those navigating divorce and marital crises. At the foundation's launch, a simple slogan was displayed, "No pain is worth losing humanity." Michael's two children, Ethan and Lily, were cared for by their grandmother after the trial, later moving to Oregon to live with their aunt. There they began a new life, far from the city where their past still lingered. A relative shared that Ethan grew up calm like his father, enjoying books and baseball, while Lily loved drawing, often sketching skies and houses with glowing windows. The kids are learning to live with their memories, not to forget, but to understand that love never fades, Linda Turner said, in a rare interview a year later. For her, justice had been served, but the loss remained eternal. Missouri's press dedicated extensive analyses to the case. One newspaper described it as a verdict on arrogance and blindness, when someone believes their emotions supersede the law. Legal scholars cited the Rebecca Lawson case in criminology classes as a textbook example of the deadly mix of alcohol, hatred, and delusions of control. Meanwhile, social organizations used the case as a foundation for campaigns against drunk driving. Billboards at Springfield's entrance bore a bold message: one moment of lost control, a lifetime of regret. Remember Michael Turner. The city's mayor, in a speech marking the tragedy's one-year anniversary, said, "Justice cannot bring back the lost, but it can ensure the living never forget the line between anger and crime." The statement was replayed repeatedly on television, becoming a message Springfield residents referenced for years. Behind the public outcry, the Lawson case file was archived in Missouri's court records, marked as one of the decade's most notable vehicular homicides. But for those in courtroom 3 that year, what lingered was not the indictments or legal conclusions, but the moment of silence, when the verdict was read, and the defendant's smile finally faded. The Rebecca Lawson case closed with a simple, harsh truth: no one stands above justice, and no arrogance can overshadow the consequences of sin. Springfield lost a father, 2 children lost their home, a community lost its sense of peace, but they also regained faith that the law has the power to restore balance, even through pain. As spring returned to Brookhaven Drive's quiet streets, people said peace had come back. But for those who lived through the summer of 2010, that peace was no longer carefree. It was a deeper understanding that justice, though delayed, remains the only light capable of dispelling the darkness of crime and human arrogance. The story of Rebecca Lawson and Michael Turner's tragic death is not just a criminal case, but a mirror reflecting many societal issues in America today, from post-divorce violence and alcohol abuse to delusions of control and personal justice. Rebecca, in her drunken rage and blind hatred, believed she was right, that her emotions outweighed the law. That misguided belief led her to drive not just a car but the tragedy of her life. In modern America, where people face increasing stress, isolation, and emotional wounds, this story reminds us that silence in the face of psychological crises can kill more than one person. Michael Turner didn't die from a sudden crash. He died because society has grown accustomed to ignoring warning signs: a mother stripped of custody, a lonely woman addicted to alcohol, and a community that believes other people's problems don't concern us. The Springfield case is a wake-up call for every American family that empathy, early intervention, and mental health support can save lives. It also reminds us that alcohol is never a solution to pain, and the law never bows to blind confidence. In a nation that values individual freedom like the United States, this story proves that freedom never comes with the right to destroy others, and justice, though sometimes late, remains the final boundary protecting humanity from its own inner darkness. If you believe justice always finds a way to prevail, please subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring true stories of crime and the truths behind them. Thank you for following, and we'll see you in the next video, where every case is not just about crime, but a reminder of the value of humanity and the limits of human nature.